Hi everyone. I'm going to dissect the motion this House of the Democratic Party of the United States would not endorse Joe Biden as the candidate for the 2024 presidential election. So I'm going to do proposition and then opposition in the dissection. So proposition first. So in terms of setup, I think you need to answer three questions. The first is what is endorsement? And I think endorsement looks like three things. Number one is funding, so it's access to the Democratic Party's funding apparatus, so access to the mega donors who make the party run its elections effectively. So funding is a big deal. The second is the support of other Democratic politicians. So politicians such as other senators and other representatives who are nationally known, but also access to local politicians like the mayor of Detroit, for example, who play a crucial role when it comes to understanding state politics. So access to those politicians as well. And then support of the party structure as well. So the party structure is in the individuals who run the voting drives to get people registered to vote, as well as the legal department who challenge voting ID laws and other laws that restrict individuals from voting in like major democratic strongholds that often push the election in their favor. The second question then is who is the alternative? I think there are four characteristics that the alternative needs to have. A, it has to be a moderate politician with centrist policies. B, has a proven track record working with the Republican Party and getting legislative things done. C is having a national name, so it's someone who comes up in everyday conversation uh, and has a lot of name recognition in the country. And D is someone who is not perceived to be a radical leftist. Crucially, you don't want someone to be perceived as a radical leftist because then he invites a lot of backlash from the Republicans, and a lot of voters may get scared that you are bringing in a socialist agenda to the United States and could alienate crucial voters in places like Florida and Pennsylvania, which are key battleground states you need to win the presidency. So someone who's perceived to be a radical leftist is a definite no-no when it comes to describing the alternative candidate to Joe Biden. But the problem is that there isn't one candidate who fulfills all the characteristics I listed. The only person that really comes to mind who could potentially fulfill all these characteristics are people like Michael Bennet, the senator from Colorado. There is the governor of Michigan. Uh, I forget her name. I think it's Gresham. Then also, in addition to which, people like Senator Tim Kaine or Senator Amy Klobuchar are other alternatives that you could use for as the alternative candidate to run for the presidency. Then you also need to answer what would Joe Biden likely do. So I think the most likely thing that Joe Biden will do is he'd retire because he's just too old to go for another office, and also he loves the Democratic Party, and it's a long-standing tradition as after the presidency, you don't get involved in the politics of the Democratic Party again. You step down and you just help the Democratic Party when they ask you to help in individual campaigns. And even if he takes up other officers, his hate towards Donald Trump is more than his dislike towards the other candidate because he just has a complete disdain towards Donald Trump. So he's unlikely to not support his replacement for the nomination for the presidency. So, argument ideas. So, why is Joe Biden likely to lose the election? So, I think there are a couple of reasons. Number one is the economy. So, contrary to what people believe that the economy is doing really well, and I think it is, unemployment is at historic lows. The real wages of individuals have been increasing. There's tremendous amounts of investment in the United States, but a lot of people oftentimes indicate the indicator that people use for the health of the economy is inflation. So even if the economy is doing really well, if the price of a loaf of bread has been increasing, people see that as an indicator that the economy is not doing too well. And it hurts the people the most because the cost of their staple goods and the things that they buy on day to day, they're increasing. They think that, look, the economy is doing terribly. So that is a big thing that you could push and say that Joe Biden is not going to win the election. The second is his age. So there has been a damning report by Special Counsel Robert Hur saying that, look, Joe Biden has a really bad memory. He's losing the memory of key events, of things such as the date that his son died. He's having verbal gaffes on national television, and he's looking really old and exhausted. And people see that he's not fit to really be president and take those decisions that are important to the running of the country. The third is he's alienating towards young people. So his refusal to, taking on the Republicans and, trying to get some of the more progressive things done that the Democratic Party wants. So stuff like, packing the Supreme Court, defunding the police, all these radical ideas he's refused to take on. So what has resulted in is that he's getting a lot of low support from the base of the party. And when you have low support from the base, things such as voting drives become less effective. That's going to cost you tremendously, especially in those battleground states. The fourth thing I think you could use is Israel-Palestine. So because of his support of Israel, a lot of people blame him for the atrocities that are being committed in Palestine. Crucially, with this analysis, you want to say that these people who are likely to vote, who are going to vote for Joe Biden, but have decided that Israel-Palestine is the biggest issue, they're unlikely to vote for Republicans because the Republican candidate in Trump also supports Israel. So it is more likely that they won't vote, and you're likely to increase voter apathy, which means that especially in battleground states, you're likely to lose out. But I would suggest against running this analysis of Israel-Palestine because of two reasons. One is a lot of the protests have been concentrated in deep blue states like California and New York. And even if those people don't vote, they are still big Democratic strongholds, and Joe Biden is likely to pick up all of those electoral votes regardless of whether they vote or not. The second is polling data suggests that the narrative that this is a huge deal for young people is false, and that a lot of young people actually care more about things like inflation way more than they care about Israel-Palestine. So the importance of Israel-Palestine as a voting issue is very, very small. Yes. And then you want to say why your candidate is likely to win. So three reasons. One is a new candidate is likely to energize the base of the party, so which is voting drives and all will be far more effective. The second is you're likely to go with a much more younger person. So Joe Biden is in his 80s, so someone even in his 60s or 50s can energize the party a lot better and bring in more young people, likely be more tech savvy, to likely to be more approachable to people. And the last thing is that less baggage. So Joe Biden has been in politics since the 1970s, and because of that, he has a lot of baggage on him. And a newer candidate, a fresh face, will have less baggage and therefore be more palatable for voters. The second argument then should be focused on, I feel, if Biden wins, why that's still bad for the Democrats. First is that he's refusal to take on Republicans. So he has refused to use the powers of the presidency or and other powers that are at his disposal to fight the Republicans when they've been actively hurting the Democratic agenda. So, for example, restricting voting rights, and then things like abortion has been overturned in the Supreme Court, and he's just refused to engage with the Republicans or fight them, which has resulted in the Democratic agenda backsliding. The second is that he's very bad at managing disasters, specifically when it comes to foreign policy. So the Taliban's takeover of Kabul, or rather Afghanistan, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Hamas attacks on Israel, and subsequent atrocities committed in Palestine all happened under his watch. So a lot of people are questioning his ability to, handle American foreign policy and handle disasters in general. The third is that he's not charismatic. So because of his inability to be charismatic, he's not growing the voter base substantially. And also he's not appealing to fundraisers. He doesn't have the oratory abilities to really appeal to a lot of fundraisers to get a lot of money in, which hurts the Democrats' ability to win elections past 2024, so 2026 midterms and the 2028 presidential election as well. So on opposition, so I think there are two things opposition needs to focus on. The first is pushing prop on who is the alternative, because crucially, to win an election, there are four things that op needs to push on prop, and it's very hard to answer for prop, right? First is that the alternative is unlikely to have any national recognition, even so far the person is likely to be someone who's moderate and ticks all the boxes that I mentioned in the prop characteristics in the alternative. B is that it's likely to be untested and doesn't have experience competing on election on a national level. And the third is, if it's radical, I already mentioned about the harms of being a radical person or being perceived as a radical leftist. So the lack of an alternative is going to be a huge burden on process. Pushing that, I think, is crucial. The second is how presidential elections work in the US. So the use of the electoral college means that the person who has the most amount of votes at the end of counting all the ballots doesn't win, but rather the person who has the most amount of electoral votes, which is based on the number of electoral uh, points given to each state in the United States. So this means that the election is decided not by the amount of people who voted for the person, but rather which state you win. So the states that really decide the presidency are states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, those kinds of states, which means that judging by the issues that matters to those people are the issues that is going to decide the presidency. So moderate policies are things that have been the revealed preference of the voters who are in those specific states. So that means it pushes away anyone who is likely to be radical. So you need someone who is moderate to win these elections. So why is Joe Biden likely to win? So I think because he's established himself in the Democratic Party, which means that he has access to people who do all the fundraising. He knows them by name. He's very, very good at maintaining personal relationships. So he knows all the big people in the Democratic Party, big people who give a lot of money to the Democratic Party. So he's very well established in Democratic politics. The second, he's known to voters. People know who he is because he's obviously the president. And even before that, he was very well known as a national figure. Then, of course, he's a moderate politician. He doesn't, like engage with radical ideas. He likes to build consensus with the Republicans. So he's a very person who's palatable to a lot of people who are against a very socialist agenda, and is also to bring in people who would vote Republican as well. These people who don't like Donald Trump because of his moderate nature. And then, of course, he's delivered a lot. So he brought them out of an economic recession caused by COVID. He has, had a huge infrastructure bill, which is going to revitalize American infrastructure. He's putting a lot of money into funding climate change with the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. And he's wiped out a lot of student loan debt. So he has done a lot and has delivered a lot for the American public. So that's why he is, because of all those things, he's likely to win the election as well. And then, of course, Trump. So Trump is an elite fighter. He's likely to bring people, and when he comes to, he's an elite fighter who can take anyone down. Especially when you have a centrist who's untested and not nationally known, he can easily take that person down. And if you have a leftist and not a centrist, it's easy pickings for Trump to tear up their personality and what they stand for and their policies, and really scare voters away from voting for the Democrats. So, which means that you're likely to result in a Trump presidency, which is really bad because he's basically running on a platform of revenge and using his executive powers to get revenge back on the Democrats who opened up these cases against him, or who are targeting him in the courts. He's going to become increasingly authoritarian. He's likely to stack the courts with more Republican judges. He's likely to repeal laws that are crucial for the Democratic agenda. So stuff like trying to get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency, or reforming laws when it comes to LGBTQ rights or women's rights, and also just his isolationist view of the world means he's likely to damage America's global image, which is going to be very, very hard for the subsequent Democratic administrations to really fix those things. So Trump coming back would be something you want to push, and you're saying that there's no alternative. Any alternative is likely to lose. Joe Biden is the best shot we got. So, but then, even if the alternative is likely to win, why is it likely to be bad? Two reasons. One is no experience. Like I mentioned again, Joe Biden is the best horse to run because he's the one who has substantial amounts of, he has done a lot with the Republicans. So because you do not have experience with working with the Republicans, no Republican support means that you're unlikely to get a lot of legislative things done, which means that your presidency would be wasted. It's going to be it's not likely to be appealing for voters count 2026 and then 2028. And then, of course, handling the pressures of the office. Joe Biden has substantial amounts of experience, a new face with a new energy, doesn't really understand the ranks of the pressures of the office, and they're likely to crack. And that means that unlikely to get a lot of stuff done. Again, electoral consequences in 2026 and 2028. So yeah, that's it. I hope that was informative about the motion. I hope I dissected it so in clear and understand.